Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Stephen Brown, and in today's video, guys, I want to go over the Maple Leafs and their goaltending situation and look over some possible options that they can explore either through free agency or from trade. The latest on Jack Campbell came from last week, and it was him saying that he's going to be leaving the contract negotiations between Kyle Dubas and his agent. And that's pretty standard stuff for players to be saying this time of year, but if we're looking at contracts the goalies have signed over the last 2 years, and we pointed this out at the beginning of the regular season, looking at what Jack Campbell's next contract could have been, it's hard to not see guys like Elvis Merzlikins, Linus Ullmark, and Cal Peterson's deals not being a comparable for Jack Campbell when you're comparing the numbers. Jack is a bit older than those guys. I can't see him getting a 4 or a 5-year deal, but that contract comparable of Cal Peterson for $5 million in 3 seasons, that's probably the starting line. And if you think that's too much money for Jack Campbell, well, then let's explore some other options, because Elliot Friedman dropped a bomb a couple of days ago saying that the Maple Leafs could be interested in trading for Anaheim Ducks goalie John Gibson. Friedman mentioned that he believes that both teams have talked before, but nothing really came close. But if you're looking at the Ducks this past season, they unloaded guys like Josh Manson and Hampus Lindholm, Rickard Rakell, Ryan Getzlaf retired. Gibson is 28, turning 29. He signed for 5 more years after this. He doesn't really fit their window of contention. So I can understand how Pat Verbeek, the new general manager there, who was just hired on, would maybe be more willing to deal him than what Bob Murray was in years past. I don't want to call what the Ducks have been doing the last 3 years rebuilding, because they didn't sell off any significant pieces until this season. And John Gibson, during those years where the Ducks haven't been very competitive, has not been his usual self. But there was a serious stretch there from like 2015, 2016 up until 2018, 2019, when Gibson was probably one of the top 3 goalies in the NHL. And like we said, he'll be 29 years old at the start of next season, with 5 more years remaining on a deal that's seeing him make $6.4 million a season. We will do a video at some point looking at how much cap space the Maple Leafs could have to play with this offseason, but from looking at it off camera, it wouldn't be impossible to fit in Gibson's cap hit, but it would be very difficult in the short term, but especially the long term, considering that in 2 years' time, you need to renegotiate deals for Matthews and Nylander, 3 years' time, Marner as well. I know by then, Tavares, Muzzin, Brody will all be off the books, and a number of other guys, but you'd have to consider this when acquiring a guy like John Gibson, who has 5 more years left on his deal. And I also just don't know what it would make sense to pay for a guy who hasn't been his usual self the last 3 years, especially when you're factoring in the financial commitment. But there is reason to believe that Gibson could improve moving from Anaheim to Toronto. No matter what you want to say about the Leafs defensively over the last couple of years, they have improved. And if you're looking at the numbers from this past season and you're comparing them defensively to the Anaheim Ducks, they're a much better team. If you don't like the fancy numbers, I understand that. But just going off of shots against and scoring opportunities against, especially on the penalty kill, the Leafs were a much better team. If you're Toronto, maybe you pick up the phone to have a conversation about Gibson, but, if it's not making sense in terms of the money and the asking price, maybe the conversation shifts from him to Anthony Stolarz. This was really the first time in Stolarz' career that he played consistently at the NHL level, and he posted a .918 save percentage in 28 games, and even had a positive goal save above expected. When we're comparing Stolarz and Gibson, that's the same defense playing in front of those goalies, and relative to the quality and quantity of scoring chances that the Ducks allowed, Stolarz had the better season. In fact, Stolarz and Gibson actually split the net in the final month of the regular season, and the only reason why I know that is because I had John Gibson in my fantasy hockey league, and it was frustrating that he was splitting those starts with Stolarz. Being 28 years old, he's basically the same age as John Gibson. He's also 6'6", so he's a huge goalie. He's a former second-round pick of the Philadelphia Flyers, but the reason why you would go after a guy like Stolarz is because he signed for $950,000 through next year. I don't acquire Stolarz banking that he plays 40 to 50 games and is your starter for you in the playoffs. I acquire him because he's got good numbers, he's dirt cheap, and he can allow you to go out and get somebody else at the goaltending position so that you could feel more confident about it. And because Stolarz is a very similar age to John Gibson, and With him being a UFA at the end of this season, I don't know if he fits the Ducks' competitive window. So maybe they're open or willing to dealing this player. If we're comparing this mystery goalie's numbers to some other decent names around the league, in terms of the 5-on-5 stats, he had a decent year. But overall, Chris Driedger's .899 save percentage from this past year wasn't so great. I'm going to need you guys to stick with me on this one for a little bit because I promise you I will explain myself. But there are some red flags here. He hasn't played a ton of games in his career to this point, but the time that he spent with the Florida Panthers over the last couple of years prior to signing with the Seattle Kraken was impressive. He posted a .930 save percentage in over 35 games. You might be wondering where all the goals went in, and that was on the penalty kill for the Seattle Kraken, where he posted a .797 save percentage. The Kraken didn't have a very good penalty kill last year, and obviously you'd have to watch the tape to understand what was going on there, whether it was the players playing in front of Driedger himself, or just some poor luck. But because of his strong numbers at 5-on-5, I'd bet that he's a decent candidate to have a bounce-back season. But with the Kraken having a lot of money and term committed to Philip Grubauer, and because they have a lot of cap space overall, I wonder if they'd be willing to discuss a trade involving a Chris Driedger for Peter Mrazek swap. I don't see a world where Peter Mrazek comes back and plays for the Leafs next year. And if they don't like the idea of buying him out, and it's too expensive to find a taker for his $3.8 million a year contract for next season and one more afterwards, the next best way to move on from the player would be a money in, money out scenario. And Driedger's a decent candidate to have a bounce back season. You know, Ron Francis being the GM for the Seattle Kraken, familiar with Peter Mrazek with his time in Carolina. Kyle Dubas and Ron Francis have a connection through the Sioux. Maybe there's something there. The Leafs would probably still have to add a little bit in that scenario, but because they're taking back a contract, it wouldn't be as significant if they were just dealing Mrazek away as a straight cap dump. Both goalies have modified no trade clauses, though, so they'd have to agree to the trade, and that always puts a kink in things. If the Maple Leafs are really in a position to spend $6 million or more on a goalie like they would be if they acquired John Gibson, I would just suggest offer sheeting Jake Ottinger. He's 23 years old. He's coming off of a good regular season and an unbelievable performance against the Calgary Flames in the playoffs. And if you really wanted to turn the heat up on the Dallas Stars, you would offer him a 4-year deal because 4 years walks him right to unrestricted free agency. But the only problem is that the only tier that would make sense to submit the offer sheet in would be either $4.2 to $6.3 million or $6.3 to $8.4 million. And Cap Friendly says that the Maple Leafs would be eligible to submit in that lower tier, but I believe that the compensation rules stipulate that you need to have your own original picks, and the Maple Leafs don't have their own second or their own third. If the Leafs wanted to be in a position to submit an offer sheet like that, they could reacquire their own picks. I believe the third is owned by the Blackhawks, and the second is owned by the Seattle Kraken, and it wouldn't be the first time that they've done it. Back in 2009, Brian Burke was working on the Phil Kessel trade that entire summer. And what finally got that deal done was he reacquired the Maple Leafs' original second-round pick from that draft to be in a position to submit an offer sheet on Phil Kessel. And because he was in that position, a deal ended up getting done about a week or two afterwards. There are some decent names available in unrestricted free agency, guys like Darcy Kemper and Ville Husso, who, much like Anthony Stolarz, is getting his first real opportunity to play consistently at the NHL level, and he's had a really good season for the St. Louis Blues. And maybe because he doesn't have as much experience, maybe you can get him at a cheaper rate than what Jack Campbell eventually signs for, but you can always bring back Jack Campbell if the number proves to be reasonable. You know, there's guys like Casey DeSmith and Braden Holtby, Marc-Andre Fleury as well. The San Jose Sharks currently have 2 goalies under a contract for next season, and Kaapo Kähkönen, who's going to be a restricted free agent. You know, they're a rebuilding team. Both Kähkönen and Adin Hill are a bit younger. Maybe a guy like James Reimer's available on the trade market. Don't give me that look. He had a decent season, and it's only $2.25 million. The Maple Leafs finished 22nd in the NHL in team save percentage in all situations, and they set franchise records in wins at home, and points. I don't want to say that the goaltending was bad because there were stretches throughout the regular season where the goaltending was really good and Jack Campbell was really good, but then there were also stretches where it wasn't. Campbell put up an 898 save percentage against the Lightning in the playoffs, and that's not the greatest. But if you're looking at the goal save above expected, it's about breaking even, which means in terms of the quality and quantity of scoring opportunities that he faced, it was about average. And I don't want to confuse average with bad because those are two different things. He just wasn't good and he wasn't bad. In terms of goaltending, there really isn't a slam dunk option available. I mean, if you want to go back to the 2016 offseason when they acquired Frederik Andersen, I think a lot of people saw that coming from a mile away. The Leafs were a young and up and coming team, and Andersen was just entering his prime. He was a goalie who was looking to move from a tandem to a number one position, and he was good. There just isn't a guy available like that this year. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're doomed. You know, there are still decent options available, but they're not options that you would look at and just say, yeah, I'm 100% confident in that. They're options that, yeah, you can have some optimism towards them, but you're going to have to wait and see. Even if you're looking at Andersen himself, he's coming off of a really good season, but he's injured in these playoffs and hasn't played a game so far, and that was a legitimate concern going into last year. I don't know, is there a name that I just didn't mention in this video? You guys can always let me know down in the comment section. I'm sure this isn't the last time that we're going to be talking about the Maple Leafs and their goaltending situation this offseason. So that's going to be it for the video, guys. Make sure to like it if you did like it and subscribe for more because more is always on the way. And guys, I'll see you in the next one.